Bom dia, boa tarde, boa noite, or whatever the case may be. My name is Marcus, and I am the host of the Black Brazil Today YouTube channel, as well as the blackbraziltoday.com blog, where I analyze Brazil from the perspective of race. So today I wanted to talk about something that, it's a pretty divisive issue these days. And, I can kind of see things from both perspectives. You know, I'm a person that I like to, listen to both sides, whatever the argument might be and come to my own conclusions. And this has been such a divisive discussion. And I was like, okay, who has a stronger point? Which point is more valid? I don't think it's possible to dismiss wholly either one side or the other. Both sides have to be able to have the discussion and analyze things from the perspective of the other side, and then hopefully come to a conclusion and being honest about it. There's a lot of things that I discover, when you have a belief in a certain thing, sometimes it's hard for you to give up the belief in something, whatever it is that you believe. There becomes a disconnect, like how much evidence somebody shows you that what you believe is not true, you continue to believe it. It's like you're disconnected. It's like cognitive dissonance. Like what other proof do you need to show that what you believe is actually not true? So in this topic is something that I have to present to both sides. Um, I get people who comment on the channel and say, okay, this is your typical leftist rhetoric or whatever. Then you got other people who will say, the other side never acknowledges the truth about, whatever the topic is, and I see, like I said, this is kind of a mix of things. So what am I talking about today? Let me talk about this idea that in Brazil, you have white privilege. Now, mind you, again, white, according to Brazilian standards, is not exactly white from what you find in the United States perspective or even Western Europe. There are, as I've said, there are millions of people in Brazil, I acknowledge, who would be white anywhere in the world, but there's also those Brazilians who are considered socially white. Like everybody knows they have some mixed ancestry, but they look mostly white, so they're kind of accepted as white. Right now, what that means to anybody looking at a particular person, so what's white for one person might not be white for somebody else. What's black for someone? What's brown for someone? Brazil is confusing in that way. So let me just get into the topic because I'm really curious to know about what subscribers or people who watch this video are going to think. Definitely want to start a discussion on this. So this is actually an article from 2015, June, and it says, recognizing white privilege. His resume was much better than mine, but he was black and I have white skin and green eyes. This is about a guy, this is a Brazilian guy who's, for all intents and purposes, he's white, but during an interview in which the other candidate was black, he acknowledges that this guy was far more qualified than him, but he ended up getting the job, and he knows why. So I'm talking about this today because this continues to be a discussion online. Currently, I think Big Brother Brazil, the reality show, is one of the most popular, if not the most popular reality show in Brazil. There's a lot of chatter coming out of like Black Brazilian social media that's saying the way Black people are treated on Big Brother Brazil, they've always been treated where if they do something wrong, they're like literally crucified. They're immediately snatched off the show. They're voted off. Whereas you'll have white Brazilians who will show similar behavior traits and people just let it slide. Either they'll stay on the show longer or in some cases they might actually win. So it's like, why is it that the same behaviors is judged differently depending on if the person is black or white? So before I get into this video, just only take a couple of seconds if you could. Like this video and share this video. That's the only way my videos will get out there. Suggest to YouTube that people like these videos. Subscribe to this channel. Click on the notification bell so that you'll know when I put up new videos. And with that said, let's get into the video for today. So this is the guy who was talking about this, okay? I often wonder, beneath all of the rhetoric that people spew about uncomfortable topics or beliefs that aren't true or things that they have an idea may not be true, although they continue to pretend it is, deep down inside when no one's around. How do they deal with this fact? This question could be applied to any number of topics: religion, politics, betrayal, history. And this is so because so many things in this life have two sides of the coin. We have the myth and we have the fact. We have facts and we have lies. We can have two or more ways of interpreting a fact. We have affirmation and denial. But how do you deal with facts that go against something that you have held to be true for a long period of time? Do you deny it? Do you acknowledge it and keep it moving? Do you not deal with it because accepting the truth is simply too painful? Or do you still hold on to the faint possibility that there could be some mistake? After reading today's post, these questions came to my mind again because I truly sometimes wonder, do persons who were born with white skin and European features really truly believe that they don't have any privileges simply because of their appearance? I mean, seriously, we live in a blatantly unfair, unequal society in which men have overwhelming control of the world's resources. The average woman generally prefers taller men, and millions of people have no health care plans. Regardless of why these things happen and any justification you could conjure up to justify it, it just is. With that said, do people who are accepted as white really believe that we're all treated equal? You know, Brazilians say, nós somos todos iguais, we are all equal. Do they really believe in racial democracies, equal opportunity, and post-racial societies, even when the evidence to the contrary is overwhelming? I mean, really, do they think that it's just coincidence that most people featured on TV look like them? Do they really believe that there is no difference in the mind of a police officer soldier when they see a group of black teenagers versus a group of white teens? I could go on and on with these questions, but you get the point. In past posts, we've touched upon this through stories of how the media treated white homeless people and former drug dealers, besides general posts dealing with the topic of whiteness and privilege. In the piece below, one man acknowledged this privilege, and as such, I just wonder silently how many people are capable of actually thinking about such a topic and then being dishonest with themselves. So I want to acknowledge, you know, there's been a discussion for a while about how any social inequalities exist, why they exist, and there are often answers that people who are arguing and explaining why this social inequality exists, there's evidence that they may or may not want to look at. For example, in the discussion that says, why are men paid more than women? When you break down all of the statistics and, you know, make them equal across the board, then you see that there's a lot of reasons for why women get paid less than men. It's not directly connected to what people would think is sexism. In the same way, when the Black community complains that, you know, we earn less money than other communities. And then when you look at some of the reasons, a lot of it cannot be just attributed simply to racial discrimination. You know, we have to look at, in the same way that with comparing the careers of men and women, we have to compare what majors did people study in college. Okay. In terms of the Black community, a large percentage of the inequality of household income has to do with Black people are less likely to have a family where there are children, a man and a woman in the same household. A lot of it can be attributed to that. So there's always reasons for why certain inequalities exist. But at the same time, there's certain, even if you wanted to say that, well, racism doesn't explain social economic inequalities, there are certain aspects of everyday life where we have to acknowledge that this does play a role from time to time. Now, just how much that plays a role is not a hard science. So it's really hard to prove all of that. But on the flip side, I've seen a number of white Brazilians who Brazil's way of dealing with racism over the years has been to just flat deny it. For years, Brazil has defined itself as a racial democracy. But then when you talk to white people and show them the facts, you know, you can go into a shopping mall or a supermarket and not be followed around by security. If you get caught stealing with something, you might get a slap on the wrist, whereas Black people will get harsh punishments. And, you know, white Brazilians have acknowledged this. There's a bunch of articles that I've done in the past. This was a big story from 2012, the benefits of whiteness. Blue-eyed white beggar becomes a sensation in a country where Black beggars are routinely ignored. So this guy was found living homeless. He was addicted. He was like, you know, he might have been on crack. People couldn't believe it. He was a model. And because he was a white man, they called him the handsome, the hot beggar. And he got famous all over again. It's like, the question was like, man, there are hundreds of homeless Black men and women living in certain areas of the country, and people routinely walk over these Black people because, oh, they're Black. They're expected to be in this situation. They took this, somebody found this guy on the street, and next thing you know, he was in the news. Like, how can this beautiful looking white man be homeless on the street and addicted to crack? And it's because of how Brazil looks at race. An old saying in Brazil says a white man running is a thief, a black man running is a white man running is an athlete, a black man running is a thief, right? These are stories of people, white Brazilians, who, if you change their skin color, they probably would not have made the news. This is the beggar I was just talking about. I think this woman was, she might have been caught up in some type of drug dealing scandal, drug trafficking. This woman right here was another woman who, she was a model. She got strung out on crack. She ended up in this area, I think in either Sao Paulo or Rio, where you find a lot of crackheads. They found her, they dusted her off and put her back on TV. Whereas you go to certain areas and you see poor, homeless, drug addicted black people, and people just routinely walk over them like, oh, well, that's what they're supposed to be. They're black. So here you have a beggar, a drug trafficker, and a thief, all white, right? But they're going to be treated different in the society because they have white skin. It's just, again, you can't quantify it, but you just really can't deny it. You know how whiteness plays out in Brazil in the job market. Preference for whiteness continues. The overvaluing of whiteness in the advertising industry, where for years you saw very few black people on magazine covers. So these are just some factors that we see all the time. Here's an article from 2019. Brazilians reflect on white privilege in the aftermath of a black teen who was just violently whipped like he was still a slave. And these white Brazilians, they discussed this. They were like, I've been caught stealing before. You know, I got a slap on the wrist. Whereas, when a black kid gets caught, they want to take him to jail. They want to punish him. In one case from that same year, this black kid was like brutally whipped by the security guards in the store. And it was a black kid. He was a teenager. He got caught stealing. And the security guards who were seen, they caught him on video. They stripped him down naked and just whipped him like he was a slave. White Brazilians saw that and it was like, I've never had to go through anything like that because I know being white, I'm just going to get a slap on the wrist. So how much can we deny that some form of privilege does exist when you have fairer skin? Okay. So again, this guy was talking about his privilege of getting a job over another guy based on what he looked like. So listen to this. He was approved in a selection because the other candidate was black, and he recalls this story. Okay. No matter how overwhelming was the superiority of his resume compared to mine, I knew that I had finally gotten that job. This text was posted on Facebook. So in September 1996, I was 21 years old, newly married, and I had an infant son. I was jobless and penniless. I was studying in the last year of my undergrad in history at the University of Sao Paulo. I had little professional experience and had sent my resume to a number of schools in the capital and greater Sao Paulo. In October, I received a phone call to start a selection process in one of the most traditional schools of Sao Paulo. At 3 p.m. one Tuesday, I and dozens of other candidates were confined in a huge class. I sat in the back as I had always done when I was a student. A lady with a blue apron entered the room with a package of tests. The selection process began with a simple test of knowledge in the area of history. I was reminded by the same lady that any error would lead to the candidate being eliminated. With the help of some candidates, the tests were distributed and we received all the time of an hour and a half to answer 20 vestibular essay questions. If vestibular is the entrance exam. A week and a half after this evaluation, it was communicated that I had been approved for the next phase of the selection process. Now I had to undergo psychological tests. At that moment, I developed a huge sense of contempt for the school and this selective process or system. Perhaps this was a method of self-defense. I don't know. The truth is that I went to these tests with such great confidence, and 2 days later, I was informed that I had also been approved in this process. The school was now down to between two candidates, so I was told by phone, and I would be interviewed by the school and the coordinator of my area. My interview was scheduled for 4 p.m. I went by subway to the Vila Mariana neighborhood and arrived well in advance. At about 3:30, something typical of Sao Paulo for the chaos on public transport always makes us be embedded or impeded. And because of this, sometimes we arrive very early or very late for an appointment, but almost never on time. When I arrived, I was informed by the secretary that the interview with the other candidate was not over yet. That meant I would personally meet my competitor. I confess I was nervous. I really needed that job. It would be a turning point for my career. I tried, however, to comfort myself. If I wasn't approved with the fact that I had gone so far for someone who didn't even have a degree in history, however, this still didn't calm me down. It was 3:50, and the other candidate ended the interview and opened the door of the director. I knew him on sight. He was also from the University of Sao Paulo, um, but unlike me, he had already had a degree in history. More than that, he had a master's and a doctorate. He was a graduate student of one of the best professors of that school, Professor Elias Domi Saliba. I had already watched some lectures of my rival at that university. He was smart. He spoke very well and was very well presented. When he saw me, he grinned and said, "Hey, aren't you that history guy?" I extended my hands, greeted him warmly, and said, "I am. You're a student of Elias, aren't you?" He confirmed, we said goodbye, and he left. At that moment, I felt absolutely relieved. More than that, I felt happy. For now, I was sure that I had gotten that job because, as great as the professional qualities of my opponent were over my qualities, no matter how overwhelming the superiority of his resume was compared to mine, I knew that I had finally gotten that job. All for one simple reason. My rival had a small difference from me. He was black. And I knew that that school, attended by the highest of the Sao Paulo elite, reactionary and white, would never employ a black man as a professor, mainly because I, the other candidate, was white with green eyes. I left the interview with a daily class schedule of 32 hours weekly and a great salary. Throughout the interview, all my disadvantages became advantages. I was young and inexperienced, so according to the director and the coordinator, I could become a teacher the way that the school wanted. In fact, I was hired because I was white with green eyes and the other candidate was black with black eyes. I don't deny my personal merits of having come so far. I studied and I study a lot and have been cunning and eloquent. But that candidate was far superior to me in all professional aspects that could apply. His only quote unquote problem was being black. If it were I who was the doctor and he was the promising youth, my competitor would not have even passed the psychological test. He only went so far because despite being black, he had an excellent track record and was a formidable person. After teaching at that school, my life has moved forward. I moved from the city. I opened a short course in a room of my house that started with only 16 students. Today, I am a businessman and the school has over 700 students. It would be very easy for me to tell a beautiful story of myself as an entrepreneur, at myself of entrepreneurship and genius. But the truth is that all this was made possible by the collective efforts of all the professors and staff who have worked and work with me. By chance, did I have some personal merits? Possibly, yes. In other cases, some decisive. I'm sure I was judged by my appearance. By chance, well, I'm sorry, let me keep this moving. Um, Everything leads us finally to a late afternoon in the city of Bauru. It was cold and began to drizzle. I drove down Araújo Leite Street towards my residence. In front of me, there was a BMW car. You could see clearly that the driver was white with brown hair. His wife was blonde. His son, blonde, was in the back seat supporting his arms between the front seat, indeed talking to his parents. The car accelerated and passed a carriage driven by a couple with their child doing the same thing as the boy in the BMW, only in the carriage were all blacks. They were in the open air and uncovered. While the BMW got in front of the carriage, I followed closely the scene closing and falling into a place, all perfectly, as a continuous process in which I explain the tragic essence of this country, this society, and mine, and thousands of other lives. I saw everything through my green eyes. What did you think of that? This guy just laid it out. As I said, and I've said this numerous times before, I'm not going to say that everything that is unequal in society is directly connected to race. Sometimes it's indirectly connected to race. Sometimes it has nothing to do with race. Sometimes there are other factors that weigh just as heavy as race. We can't just broad stroke everything and say this is the one reason that holds us back for this. There's a lot of other aspects of whatever we're looking at that we have to analyze to make it a discussion of apples versus oranges. And even though Brazilian society as a whole continues to deny how this what you call white privilege affects them and often gives them advantages that black or brown Brazilians do not have. This guy laid it open. I mean, he clearly saw there was no way he should have gotten that job over the black candidate, but he knew. And this is what when black Brazilians talk about structural racism, this is part of the thing that they're talking about. If everybody who's making a decision that affects somebody's life is white and they lean towards someone with a white privilege or with a white appearance, is it impossible that that person could get an advantage over the person who is not black or the person who is black? When it comes down to something like a selection process. So I really liked what this man had to say. There's been other white Brazilians along the way who have explained. There's an article on the blog that says, look, even in the favela, I have, favela being the low income areas in the hills of large Brazilian cities. And this girl wrote a piece where she says, look, I'm white, but even in the favela, I have an advantage just because I have white skin. So white Brazilians, a lot of them know it. A lot of them deny it. A lot of them will say this doesn't exist, even though deep down they've seen it in action. So this is what I wanted to share because there's been other discussions about this, what people call in Brazil is called privilégio branco or white privilege. So I would just want to lay this article down because I'm quite sure in the future there's going to be other videos that are going to be to put into context. This would be a good video to understand what people are still talking about today, in the job market, other opportunities. So just curious, what did you think about this piece? Let's start a discussion in the comment section. Like this video, share this video, subscribe to the channel, click on the notification bell so that you'll know when I put up another video. And with that said, I'm going to end this video here and invite you all to come back and check out the next video that I post.